Started.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Good morning, and thank you so much for spending part of your morning here with us. We're going to be talking today about general education, the backbone of lifelong learning and professional success. So we hope to convince you of that if you are not already. And we have a little bit of an icebreaker here while people are still coming into the talk. What was your favorite college course that was not in your major? If anybody would like to type that into the chat pod or come off mute, or Tonya or Jen, maybe you could. I don't want to do too much with my screen in case I click on something wrong. If anybody jumps in, um, you can maybe read that one out.
We have a
Let's see.
history
Okay.
so far. Yep, history.
Teaching art.
Oh, wait.
Oh, that's exciting.
Yeah, that is. Mine was psychology. I'll just throw that in there.
I thought about a double
Mine was
major.
philosophy.
Ooh,
Mine was
philosophy.
actually philosophy because if you think about it, it's something we don't study in high school. So it was all new. I knew nothing about it.
Mhm.
Interesting.
Sociology.
Okay.
Oh,
I,
that's great. Liked it so much that they added it as a minor. That's wonderful. Hmm.
well, I think we're already on track here. This is
Yeah,
good.
I was gonna say
This is
this is
great.
perfect. Setting
Mine
us
was
up.
mine was theater, which I don't think anyone would ever believe. But I really enjoyed being on the stage crew. I thought that was really fun, and a neat insight into a world that I never would have had the courage to endeavor into. So wonderful. Well, thank you for joining us in the little icebreaker. I think it's really interesting to see everyone's perspective and to reflect on some of those courses that maybe we didn't fully carry into our careers, but also helped shape who we are. So we're going to introduce ourselves briefly.
Hello, my name is Tonya, and I am the lead faculty of our mathematics courses in general education.
Oh, my turn. I'm Leah. I've been chatting with you so far. I'm the science lead here at CTU, and I've been a lead SME over a couple of our different science courses.
And I'm Jennifer Daines. I'm one of the executive program directors in the College of General Education and Psychology here at CTU. What that basically means is I'm the desk where everything lands on for math, English, and sociology at our institution.
Oh, much more than a desk, Jen. Cornerstone of what we do.
I'm going to get started now. Just to tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today, we are going to highlight the importance of general education, why it's important, how the courses interconnect to show transferable skills, how we can use AI to generate common learning outcomes that reinforce the role of general education as the backbone of industry relevant education. We look at general education not just preparing students for their major classes, but preparing students for life and their careers. General education, in our opinion, cultivates adaptable, well rounded graduates equipped to thrive in professional settings. We're going to start off with the definition. What is general education? General education, as opposed to a specific disciplinary major or area of concentration, consists of a set of requirements from a wide range of the major areas of human knowledge that all students at a college, regardless of major, must complete. At most institutions, it consists of about 30% of a student's entire college education. So, about 30% of the credits they need to graduate. When we talk about the importance or the value of general education, we also have to address some of the misconceptions of general education. The first misconception is it's an academic taste testing. While it can be, as someone mentioned earlier, they took sociology and then it became their minor. That's the great aspect of general education. So it can be an introduction to a course you've never seen or a topic you've never seen before, but we don't want to approach it as, oh, you're just going to touch on mathematics and never use it again. We also don't want to look at general education classes is courses that require little study time. If you really want to grow and you want to gain knowledge from these courses, you have to put in the effort, just like you do in any other course. Some students and faculty look at it as a requirement that students just have to check that box to get it out of the way. Okay, I've checked this box. I'm one step closer to graduation. Well, yes, they are one step closer to graduation, but that's not all they're getting out of it. And so many people look at general education as unrelated courses with unconnected facts. Great, I'm taking a math class. I'm going to learn it just enough to pass it, and I'm going to move on. Yeah, that's not how it works. And yes, I'm a little biased because I am math, but that's not the way it works. You're learning skills that you're growing as a person that you're going to take with you into your future. So why are general education classes important to students? When you're building a house or a building, you have to have that solid foundation and the framework. It's so important that most states require an inspection at that point. The builder can't continue until it's past the inspection because they want the structure to hold. Well, we look at general education classes in that same idea. It's the frame, not of a house, but it's the frame of your education. So it's the frame of your academic structure. We think that you're gaining the structure and support that you need for specialized skills to make you well-rounded and adaptable. These critical skills are important as industries evolve and companies are demanding that their professionals, their employees, can think critically, they can adapt quickly, and they can solve complex problems. So if you don't have that solid foundation, you just have little pieces of information, you're not going to have all of those skills to be successful in your future. So general education courses may not seem directly tied to your career goals, but they are critical for building a skill set that employers are looking for today. To have a valuable or a good general education program, the courses have to be intentionally structured and build on skills. So that's going back to that menu. You don't just want a menu for students to sample from. You want the courses to be designed as opportunities for students to learn skills and to build on those skills in their other general education classes. From what we've read and what we believe, we think a general education program should include mathematics, science, history, English, and philosophy, as mentioned earlier. And these courses will not only improve the skills, but they'll make them more meaningful. For that to happen, we go back to that intentionally structured and to build on skills. So, as I mentioned earlier, you don't just take a math class to pass it and say, okay, I'm done. I've learned my math. I'm ready for something new. You're taking those skills and you're using them in other classes. It's building your critical thinking. So we could sit here today and we could discuss different general education classes and the connections between them. For example, if I said to you, okay, do you think a math course and a science course are connected? Most of you are probably going to say, yes, of course they are. You learn how to solve a formula in math. You learn how to apply those formulas in science. They go hand in hand and it makes sense to everybody. So yes, those are connected and you're building on skills. You're making those math skills more meaningful by applying them in a science course. But there's more to it. Let's think about math and philosophy. Philosophy is all about logic and reasoning. It's how you think, how you write, how you express yourself. It's all logic and reasoning. Well, there's an entire area of mathematics called logic. There's logic math classes. And if you understand how logic is done in your thinking in philosophy, and you take that to a logic math class or truth tables, converse, inverse, just to name a few things, making that connection, that's where we're saying you're not just improving those skills, but you're making them meaningful. You're understanding how your critical thinking skills are improving because you're making those connections and you're actually applying skills from both of those classes in the other class. Science and history is another one to think about. Science and history, you can think of both of them as studying the process or a process of change over time. But what if you put those together? For example, if you're thinking about climate change, is something happening in the world at that time that could impact the climate? I think of things like the Industrial Revolution. Of course, that had to have impacts on our environment. Understanding what the Industrial Revolution is from a history class, and then understanding climate, how the environment is impacted by those things in a science class, show that connection. Everything is becoming more meaningful. So we've talked about general education as building that foundation. It's preparing you where you have those interconnections. But what about preparing you for the workforce? Well, we all hear about AI. We hear about it all the time. And we know that AI is not going anywhere and it's important skill for the workforce. So we went directly to AI, Perplexity to be exact, and said, why are general education courses important? And here was the response. General education classes prepare students for the workforce by building broad, transferable skills that employers consistently say they want, not just job specific knowledge. So, what are some of those transferable skills? Well, according to AI, communication, critical thinking, problem solving, global awareness, and information literacy. We're going to touch on each of those, and you're going to see throughout the presentation how they actually apply to our general education classes. So, developing these skills prepare students to better navigate the job market and adapt to challenges introduced by AI. Before we dive deeper into all of this, we're each going to take a minute and we're going to tell you what general education means to us. So remember in our introduction, we all work in the College of General Education. So yes, we think it is valuable, but here's why. So I have a little timeline there of myself, and it's starting with me as a freshman in college. I did look at my general education requirements as checking a box. Okay, I have to take this class, get me closer to graduation. I quickly learned that I was wrong. So, first box, me checking off everything. Second box, I started to look a little closer. I spent some time in those classes and I saw that I was building a foundation of knowledge and skills. And then I saw that it was continuing in other courses. And let's go back to that taste testing. I was trying new topics and I found that I really liked some of these other topics. And I thought about it and I thought, why? And it's because I was learning more about myself, learning more about how I think, and learning more about how to communicate with others. I was growing as a person while I was taking all of those classes. So, Dr. Daines already mentioned philosophy, but I'm going to bring philosophy into it now. So, I took Introduction to Philosophy my freshman year of college. And as mentioned, I never had a philosophy class in high school. Wasn't an option for me. So, it was my first introduction to philosophy. And it kind of blew my mind, to be honest. I really saw how my critical thinking skills were improving, and I am a math person. So I thought I already had critical thinking skills, how to approach a problem, but it really opened my eyes to new ways. And then on top of that, it improved my writing skills. So, new way of thinking, and I really saw how I grew as a person. And now I'm going to pass it over to, I think, Dr.
For me, general education, yeah, I have a slightly different lens, and I like to use this lens when I'm talking to new students during our institution's new student orientation. And I might be dating myself here, but one of the things I like to ask them is, have they ever seen Jay Leno's jaywalking episodes? And the older ones have, the younger ones not usually. And so I describe it a little bit. And so for those of you who may not know what I'm talking about, um, it was the Late Show, the Tonight Show with Jay Leno. And what he used to do is take his microphone and camera crew out on the streets around his studio and randomly talk to people and ask, he called it jaywalking, and he would ask people questions that a high school graduate should know. And in many cases, an elementary school graduate should know. So he would come up to random people on the street and ask them questions like, who was the first president of the United States? Or what is a noun? Or how do you find the area of a rectangle? Right? I had to get the math in there. So he would ask them these questions that everyone would know, and invariably someone would get it wrong, and not just wrong, but hilariously wrong, and everybody would laugh and have a great time. So when I present those stories in new student orientation, one of the things I say is, why is that funny? Why did we laugh? Why is that funny to us? Well, it's funny to us because as a society, we expect high school graduates to know those things. It's like our contract with society, between education and society. So, general education to me is that set of knowledge, competencies, and skills needed to keep us from becoming jaywalkers, right? Nobody wants to be in that position. Like I said, it's a type of contract between higher education and society at large, indicating, in our sense, what is expected of college graduates. That's what general education is. It's what our society expects college graduates to know, no matter what their major. In addition, though, and this is really important in the AI age, I think it's the humanity in an AI driven economy. Because if AI can do those technical things for us, those tasks, what value do we bring? It's that humanity. And it's what we learn in many of our general education courses, including the humanities, right? Philosophy, literature, that sort of thing. It's more important than ever, I think. In fact, in my opinion, general education may be the most important part of a college education going forward because we live in an AI age in such a technical environment. So, as a personal example, Tonya shared her experience with philosophy. I'm going to share my experience with the more technical stuff. So, in my undergraduate education at the U.S. Air Force Academy, part of my general education or core requirements that everyone had to take was a series of science and engineering courses. So while knowledge about orbital mechanics or the right hand rule in mechanical engineering may not be featured on an episode of Jaywalking, all right, it's not necessarily common knowledge. I will give that. It did represent the knowledge that I was expected to know as a graduate of that institution. So when we talk about general education, there is room for institutional differentiation in there, but it all goes back to the same thing. What is an institution or a society, right, expect graduates to be able to know and do across the board? To this day, I will tell you that my thinking reflects the problem solving skills that I developed in some of those more technical courses, even though I ended up majoring in English and going into education. I still have that technical thinking in my brain because of those courses and those experiences in my gen ed undergraduate experience. So, with that, I will pass it off to Leah.
Thank you so much. It's funny because I think we sort of did the opposite with our personal, bringing our general education into our lives. I sort of narrowed my focus and I reflect back on English and theater as being liberating and interesting and, but I sort of, as I moved through my career, sort of narrowed my focus into analysis. Um, but for general education, to me, it's very polarizing. I have two children. These are not my children. These are AI children. But when it comes to roller coasters, they have very different reactions. My daughter looks like the little girl here with the doing the airplane, super excited about it, wants to go on an adventure where, there's an unknown, doesn't mind not seeing the end of the track. And then we have my son who would be a little grumpier about that, wants to understand exactly what's happening, the purpose for it, all of those things. So I think that general education for many of us, is exciting. Not knowing what we're going to find or what we're going to uncover, what we're going to enjoy, or maybe what's going to challenge us. And then some of us, maybe if we don't really see the point, it's not going to enhance my career, or at least I don't see that it's going to enhance my career, then maybe I'm not quite as happy about it. Or if I don't think I'm going to do well, then maybe I'm not quite as happy about it. I think that, it sort of polarizes us when it comes to general education. I think for me, things that would excite me would be now I want to take a philosophy class after talking with both of you. But history, I don't tend to facts don't stick well in my brain, in my timeline. So I don't think I would do well. So I think that would make me grumpy, although I would love learning it. So, it's sort of a difficult call there. But general education, though, we feel as a whole super important for many things. We believe, Tonya, Dr. Daines, and myself, that general education holds great value in academic, professional, and personal growth. Um, and we posed this question to AI. We asked AI, what are some common outcomes for these general education courses? What are those, as Tonya discussed earlier, what are those things that we're developing in our students, those areas that we want to grow, seeds, if you will, that we want to nourish and water and develop and grow as students progress through their education, through that 30% of their education. So when we asked AI, what are those common outcomes for classes like math, science, history, writing, and communication? We got AI to tell us that critical thinking was one of those major outcomes that we could expect students to develop. Information literacy, effective communication, and also that problem-solving, analytical reasoning outcome. And so we took a deeper dive into each of these outcomes as we'll go through here. And it's a little bit wordy, but and certainly not limited to those four, but those were four that AI gave back to us so that we wanted to kind of pull out and discuss. And some of these we can see a very direct correlation. So for example, with critical thinking, defined as analyzing information, evaluating evidence, drawing reasoned conclusions. So all of those skills that are encompassed by critical thinking. With subjects like math, science, and history, we can see a very direct correlation there with instances or examples of how students would analyze information, evaluate evidence in science, for example, draw conclusions based on historical context, that type of thing. And so we wanted to kind of highlight the classes where those correlations might not be quite so direct. So for example, in critical thinking, how does writing and communication really help foster critical thinking? And so you might already know this. um, I tend to think of writing as an action, not so much a process, but I was very much corrected by our fantastic English lead. Her name's Christy Yorks. And she said this, and I have to quote her because I can't say it any better. She says, if critical thinking is daring to ask and explore the question, writing is the way we build a bridge to see where that question leads. So yes, writing is an action, but it is a process, and it is developing that thinking, and it is leading you through those thoughts, not simply presenting the thoughts. It's working through them. So she says, we don't write because we know, we write to know. We can't think through an idea without the words that form and shape that idea. So, writing as an action, working through, and critically thinking as you write, which as a writer, I'm sure she does multiple drafts and kind of builds and develops her arguments and such as she moves forward with that. So we wanted to kind of pull out ways that these courses help to develop these skills. The next one here with that AI gave us information literacy. So information literacy requiring students to find, evaluate, and ethically use information. And so in science, history, and writing and communication, we can see how we would need to understand where our sources, who our sources are, who's telling us this information, who's giving us this data, this scientific data, who's making this claim. Is it a laboratory? Is it a government institution? Is it a private lab? With history, what's the lens of that person or that group who's presenting this information? And certainly with writing and communication, understanding who is bringing that forward is really important. But with math, surely math is just cut and dry. It's just, it either is or it isn't. The answer is right or wrong. But we would like to bring this forward that math is also a great way to develop your information literacy skills. So, for example, with statistics, and Tonya has this great tagline here: numbers do not lie, but statistics can mislead us. Um, and here's just a kind of an example of the graph on the left here. You see different automobile brands, Chevy, Ford, Toyota, and then Nissan or Datsun. So if we were to say these are sales, we would say, wow, Chevy is selling great. Or if we were said maybe these are repairs. Whoa, something happened with Chevy. But we don't know the context. But either way, this graph is um, pretty informative. However, if we back up and see the actual graph, the graph on the right here is the scale. The scale is actually kind of um, made in such a way as to direct your conclusion there on the left. But if we look at the scale on the right, we see that maybe it's not so different after all. So that information literacy piece, that understanding what we're being told, who's telling it, what the data actually says, versus maybe the way it's represented, those are all ways that we can build that skill in mathematics. I'm sure we've never been misled by a stat, though. The next one here is effective communication. So we just talked through that in math, an example of that. History, writing, and communication, understanding our audience, effective, efficient, and professional communication. Certainly, that's all very important as we develop as students and as individuals. But what about science? Scientists just do their experiments and they report it in a journal. That peer review process. That's very linear, not a whole lot of wiggle room there. But there really are different ways that scientists present their information. So communicating scientific findings can be done in several ways. There are technical journals such as the Nature Journal, which you'll never see in a doctor's office. It is sort of like a cookbook of sorts, for scientists. It tells you their recipes, their processes, the super nitty-gritty details that the casual reader wouldn't be interested in and wouldn't really necessarily appreciate. I'm not a chef and I don't know the different types of ways to make things. So telling me how you made something probably wouldn't mean a whole lot to me. And it's similar when it comes to science. However, if you're in a doctor's office and you're, just waiting for your appointment, you might see Scientific American sitting on the table. And the purpose of that is to communicate scientific findings and areas of scientific research to the general public. So that's going to be much more digestible, much more interesting, much more, attention grabbing. So not any less true, but less detailed and just more for the intended audience. So again, that effective communication piece, understanding your audience, expressing ideas clearly, and then using that to communicate that scientific information. So our last one here, our last outcome from our AI generated query was problem solving and analytical reasoning. So we kind of combined those two. And so, of course, in math and science, that quantitative problem solving, the scientific inquiry, with writing and communication, talking through problems, structuring your argument, setting up that dialogue, however that might look. But when it comes to history, surely history either did or didn't. It happened one way or it didn't happen another way. These are all very factual things. But I challenge you to think about some historical concepts and events in a slightly different light. So we can take something that happened in history and think about it in the historical context as one way, and then bring it to present day context and filter it through that lens as well. And so we will start to see problems arising. We'll start to see conflict. We'll start to see argument, that type of thing. And when I ran this through our AI process here, one example was the Industrial Revolution and child labor. The historical context was, when we think about child labor and we say, no, that's not okay, because we're thinking about it through our current day lens. But when we think about it in the historical context, during the Industrial Revolution times, families were, well, pre-Industrial Revolution, families were had to make their own clothes and feed themselves, and they're very self-sufficient. So children were working. They were still doing things around the home, whether that was farming, etc., helping to provide for the family's needs. So when the Industrial Revolution came about, children went from working in the home to working in the factory, which wasn't such an exception to the rule. It was just more, it seemed more as an extension of what they were doing, gathering an income rather than maybe working on the farm, but they were still working. These days, though, child labor is universally condemned. We want our kids to go outside and enjoy the sunshine and play baseball, not so much work yet. Prepare to work, go to school, gain those skills, but not to be performing work for the family at this point. So very different way there of approaching that same situation depending on the context. And so why do these outcomes matter? These seeds that we're planting as students go through their educational journey, critical thinking, information literacy, effective communication, and problem solving. Why are they so important? They're important not just to our students, but they are important to our students. They're also important to employers. So for our students, these types of skills grow professional skills, communication, personal skills. They can use them on all areas of their lives, not just in their job, not just at home, not just when that confidence that they have when they open a textbook or they read the newspaper. All of those things help build up our students. And they're also important to our employers. Our employers have expectations in the workplace. They expect their employees to have professional communication skills, to understand the context with which things are occurring, whether that's communication from administration or corporate, any type of communication like that, and to have those critical thinking and problem solving skills as well. So important across the board for both our students and also the employers. All right, I'll pass it over to Dr. Daines for a little bit more information about CTU and how we use those learning outcomes.
So what's amazing to me is when we went through this exercise of collaborating with AI to determine, okay, what are the core competencies that within outcomes for general education, kind of across the board, as it turned out, our institutional general education outcomes, which also function as undergraduate learning outcomes assessed all the way into the programs, covered those also. And so just to give you a little backstory about this. So I think it was about 2 years ago, we decided as an institution that it was time that we not only reviewed our undergraduate or general education learning outcomes, but that we revised them because they hadn't really been revised in a long time. And so we wanted to do that. We wanted to get a whole lot of input from everyone across the university as we did that so that everyone's voices were heard. And not only that, the most important reason we wanted to do that is so that we weren't missing anything. Because historically, our outcomes had been decided in a room full of gen ed faculty without really input from across the university, and everyone's a stakeholder, whether it's student success, whether it's operations, admissions, and a lot of other offices across the university. And so we got a lot of input on this. And we went through a rather rigorous process to take that input code it, right? And come up with what does this really represent to answer the question, like I said when I talked about jaywalking, right? What is it that society expects CTU graduates to be able to know and do by the time they graduate? And this is what we came up with. So these are our undergraduate and general education learning outcomes. And so we address these in general education courses as well as into their students' program courses, and we assess all the way through that. So here's what ours are, and you'll see they're directly tied to our mission, given that we're Colorado Technical University. We have that T in our name. So our first outcome is develop technical fluency. And in the age of AI, that is an extremely important outcome for employers, as Tonya was talking about. It's important for employers, for graduates to be able to be fluent in not just current technology, but whatever technology may come out 10 years from now, right? A lot of us here, we had to adapt to smartphones, to AI, right? And a whole host of them. What's going to be here 10 years from now? We want our students not to just to know today's technology, but to be able to adapt. Our second one also relates directly to our mission, build professional presence. And to us, what this means is that ability to conduct yourself in a professional setting. It involves a lot of those skills Leah talked about: communication, right? Collaboration, teamwork, the ability to think critically in that type of environment where you're having to make a decision fast. It involves being able to present yourself, run a meeting like on Zoom, like we're doing here. We felt that that one really applied to our mission, and it was important to employers for our graduates to be able to do that. The rest of them you'll see are very familiar, and they align with what Leah talked about, and also with what you probably see at your institution. So employ problem solving strategies. We left this very broad on purpose because that could mean a whole host of things, right? And as Tonya talked about, that doesn't just mean math and science. We do problem solving across the disciplines that make up gen ed. Our next one we've talked about extensively: demonstrate information literacy, and Tonya talked about that, so that is extremely important. And then write effectively for your audience and purpose. So we wanted to tie writing not only to just be able to write, grammar-free sentences and that sort of thing like we expect college graduates to be able to do, but to be able to tailor your message and actually be effective at communicating and writing by addressing your audience and your purpose, your message. And then finally, model intercultural competence. And we felt like this is also important for employers today. In any work environment, you're going to be collaborating with coworkers. You're going to be having to do team projects with people who are different from you. And so this is extremely important for us because it conveys that, are you able to work with people? Are you able to understand people? Are you human and able to interact in a meaningful and effective way? And so these are just one example of our institution for general education learning outcomes, but we believe that they follow the principles that we've talked about here today. With that, I will turn it back over to Leah.
Wonderful. Oops, there we go. Just some closing thoughts here about general education, cultivating adaptable, well-rounded graduates. And I had to write that down because I just love the way that sounds. I think that it really captures everything we're talking about. We want our students to have tools for personal growth, professional success every single day. And so we brought these back, sort of our icebreaker subjects back. And we wanted to share some fun facts about each of these subjects, just because when you think that, general education and these different subjects will never impact you, I dare you to try to forget some of these fun facts. So when it comes to sociology, a cup of coffee, which I have been enjoying, is a complex social object, not just a drink, because it embeds individuals within global economic networks, social rituals, and cultural norms. And when I thought about that, I thought, coffee, really? But then I've known people from other countries who have very different coffee, and very different strengths of coffee, and very different symbolic importance of that coffee, and in sharing coffee with that person or having tea with that person is really an important almost status, that your friends, that you mean something to them for them to share that with you. So yeah, it's a really interesting thing to think that coffee is really, uh, you know, part of that sociology study. When it comes to psychology, publicly announcing your goals makes you less likely to succeed because it gives you a premature sense of accomplishment that reduces motivation. So next time do that, um, gosh, New Year's resolution, maybe we shouldn't share it because that predisposes us to not succeeding, unfortunately. Um, English. A new word is added to the English dictionary roughly every 2 hours. There was a ghost word. English once had a word dort, I guess that's how you pronounce it. I've never heard it because it's not actually a word. It appeared in the dictionary for 8 years despite not actually existing. So I think that would be a fun exercise. If your kids get bored on summer vacation, hey, go through the dictionary and find a word that doesn't exist, and then we can be famous. When it comes to history, the shortest war was just 38 minutes long. And then tea in tanks since 1945. All British tanks have been equipped with tea making equipment, which again maybe goes back to our sociology experiment that we were talking about earlier with coffee. For theater, the break a leg phrase originated in vaudeville, where performers waited in the wings hoping for a chance to go on stage or break the barrier of the leg line. So apparently that's the line where you start to become visible. And so that's what that means. I always thought it was more, actually breaking a leg. So yeah, not science at all, but more theater. And then philosophy means love of wisdom. So I think again inspires me to want to go back and look at some of our philosophy courses a little more closely and learn a little bit of that. So those are some fun facts we just wanted to share with you. We wanted to, of course, disclose that we used AI for this discussion. Much of this information, all of the fun facts were from AI. And used it in concert to help us develop this presentation and think more deeply about our learning outcomes, about general education and the value that it has for our students and employers as well. So yeah, thank you. And we'll take questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. It was awesome. And as you said, now is open time for question. You can unmute yourself, ask them here, or you can put them in a chat. This session is still recording, but I'll probably stop the recording now so we can ask questions that will not be recorded. But if you do have a question that you feel comfortable being recorded, you can ask so.